You're listening to the Presence Pioneers podcast. Everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Lilley, and we are in episode 2 of the season called Back to Eden. I'm here with my wife, Shepard.
Hi.
And we're going to be talking today about what it means to abide in the vine, what it means when we get pruned, what it means to bear fruit, and all kinds of things like that. It's going to be awesome. So excited to talk about this. Hey, just want to thank you guys. If you're a part of the podcast community, thank you for tuning in regularly, joining with the conversation, commenting on Substack or YouTube, sharing things on social media, liking, emailing us, reviewing, rating, all those kinds of things. Really appreciate it.
Good reviews.
Good reviews only. Hey.
We appreciate the good reviews is what I'm saying.
Yes. Thank you so much. And if you're new here, welcome. It's great to have you. We want to help you experience and host the presence of God because we believe God's presence changes everything. So if you're passionate about worship and prayer and revival and missions, this is the podcast for you. So be sure to hit like and subscribe wherever you're tuning in. We're going to give you teachings and conversations and interviews to help just fuel your pursuit of God's presence. All right, here we are. Episode 2. I'm going to dive into John chapter 15. The last one was fun. We talked about the garden, talked about Genesis. We ended up talking about the Industrial Revolution. And
thumbs
evolution.
Down.
So it was great.
Who knew that was in Genesis?
Yeah, not me. But here we are. This is great.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to dive in here. I'm going to read quite a few verses. Genesis 15, excuse me. No, not Genesis.
Let's go back.
This week we're in John 15. I'm going to read 1 through 10. This is Jesus. He says, I'm the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers. And the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. All right, lots of stuff.
That's our fruit that we bore, making so much noise in the other room.
Yeah. If you hear the children playing in the background, it's because we've been bearing fruit over the last 15 years. So just as a reminder, if this is the first time you're tuning in, if you missed last episode, this season we're looking at the scriptures that are related to gardening, homesteading, and which is most of the Bible, because the Bible and most of human history, as you pointed out last time, has been communities of agriculture, growing their own food and taking care of animals and all of that. And so we're just going to scratch the surface, but we're going to get into it. You are a gardener and a homesteader, and so you bring some of that practical perspective that will help us get greater insights into the scripture. Maybe think about it a little bit more like the original readers would have, or the original hearers would have understood some of these truths that Jesus and the apostles and the prophets were using when they were teaching about these things. And so Jesus is obviously speaking about what they understood, which is the idea of vines and fruit and those kinds of things, abiding in the vine. So any initial thoughts on this section here?
Pruning And the relation of pruning to bearing fruit, and then also the relation of pruning and bearing fruit to dormancy, which is also part of it, especially with vines, things like grapes, which is likely what they were envisioning.
Grapevines,
Yeah, because of vineyards. That was the first one of our small groups, my gardening small group, where we had a real like Holy Spirit revelation moment. We were watching a not spiritual, very practical video on pruning blueberry bushes. And at some point in the process, we realized that we were crying, like we were all misty. Mary Beth was actually like crying and being like, "Whoo, Jesus!" And there's a lot of like, and it was not. The woman who made the video is a Christian, but she was not coming at it from that point of view. There was no reference to the Bible at all. It was just
how to prune your blueberry bush.
Right. It was literally us having grown up hearing about being the vine and the branches and what happens with pruning and how, oh no, I'm in a pruning season. Oh, bless me, Lord, I'm in a pruning season. And having her walk through practically as a gardener, as someone caring for a vineyard and an orchard, like what pruning is for. It messed us up. It was a really good, like, oh my goodness, like the practical application of gardening rules that are discussed. And we think of it as Christian lingo to be pruned and being in a pruning season and pray for me, I'm in a pruning season. Like, that's even things.
My boyfriend broke up with me.
Right. Yeah. He pruned off my boyfriend. Like, girl, no, he did not. That's not what that means. So it was just that was a really good, like early on, like a revelation to me that like from my nerd out practical deep dive into gardening and the different aspects of it, like it was going to bring the Bible to life in a new way for me and for the people coming to learn about it. So
it's awesome. So that's verse 2. And that was one of the first things I wanted to ask you about was about pruning, because I know that's fun and something we've talked about. So obviously Jesus he says, I'm the vine, my Father is the vine dresser. So it's God, the Father, who is dressing the vine, which he would be the pruner.
the gardener.
Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. I want to pause on that and talk about that later, because it kind of, he gets back into that in verse 6. In the second half of verse 2, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. So give us some insight into what the pruning process is like.
Sure. That's why I say when you use the example of the girl with her boyfriend, like he wasn't pruning your boyfriend, he was removing a branch that was not bearing fruit. That's not the same as pruning. So I don't have these memorized. So, but when you get into pruning, there are 5 Ds in the practical sense for pruning, and you remove the 5 Ds, which is anything that is dead, anything dying, anything damaged, anything disfigured, and any diseased wood. So anything dead is pretty obvious. When you get to the end of the season, you normally prune in the fall. You prune in the fall so that it's not confusing.
I just want to say, like, it's interesting. You said prune at the end of a season. So
Right. Yes. Okay. So you prune at the fall because it is the end of a season, but it's the beginning of a different season.
Right.
For a different part of the plant. So you prune in the fall so that the plant has already gone dormant. So because what pruning does is it signals to the plant that you don't grow right here anymore. You now push out new growth on the other part of the plant that I want to keep. But which is what happens if you do it in the middle of the spring or summer when it's still putting out leafy things. But you're supposed to prune in the fall because it gives the plant time to heal before trying to grow more up on top where everyone can see it. And also the fall and winter are there. It's why leaves fall onto the ground and turn into mulch. Fall and winter are there to feed the roots so that they can sustain the fruit in the coming season, because if you keep pruning it to make it bush and grow more up top and the roots can't hold it, even if it bears a lot of fruit, it'll just fall over, like rip the roots out of the ground and all of it dies. So pruning is at the end of a season, but specifically pruning is to kick off the root season, the winter, the fall and winter. Right. It's not like a new spring. It is focusing on
A different
part of the plant. Yeah, a different place. So with the one that stuck out to me, well, two. One is a dead and dying and damaged are pretty clear. Like that's an obvious, like, okay, you get to the end of the season and you cut off anything that has died because some things only fruit on that 1 year. And then you don't leave them on there because it's just a dead stick that'll get in the way of the growth the next year. That's easy. Dying, okay, yeah, get that out of there. It's dying. Damaged means that it opens up the plant to disease and pests if you leave that attached to it, and which can take out the whole plant. But disfigured, I don't know, probably because I'm talking to you about it, but it's never hit me before that one of the things we talked about in the last one was everything being created in the image of God. And so things that are disfigured, if we're talking about spiritual pruning, would be...
Well, I hope you guys are picking up on all the layers of meaning as she's sharing this.
But pruning off anything that is disfigured and not in the image of God. And then when it specifically says diseased wood, any part of the plant that you're pruning off that's wood is an older established part of the plant. Once a plant gets woody, like if you look at a little baby blueberry bush, all the stems are green. Right. If you look at one that's been in the ground for 10 years, the stems at the bottom are wood, and the stuff that's new this year with blueberries on it is green. So anything that you're pruning off that is diseased wood means that it has already been established and been around for a while and has borne fruit before, but is not anymore. And so sometimes pruning requires taking off things that you've maybe put some time into establishing and that has borne fruit for you before in the past, but is not going to in the future. So, and all pruning, the reason you have to do it when it's about to be, or when the plant is dormant, is because pruning is not telling the plant not to grow. Pruning is the opposite. And everyone that starts gardening near me learns this quickly with things like if you start trying to prune something to get it under control, when it's the growth season, you're going to quickly lose control of everything. Because wherever you cut it, every node, every point of growth where leaves or branches would come out underneath that will go nuts and be like, well, then all my energy is going over here. And so it's kind of like a hydra where you cut off one head and now you have two. That's how things like basil work, or like the flowers zinnias, is if you look at where you're cutting it, when you cut off one to take it inside, there's two more underneath it. And after you cut it, the more you cut it, the more it grows while it's in the season of growing. So pruning is not death, and pruning is not slowing down growth. Pruning is a way to encourage growth. But when you prune determines whether it's growth up top or growth of the roots underneath.
Yeah.
So
pruning is not killing. There is a difference. Jesus said there's some things he's...
Right.
What does he say? Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. So
not pruning is neglect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you about that. I was just going to make the point that, sometimes I think when we go into those seasons of pruning, the winter feeling seasons, I think it's important to ask God if he's pruning us or not. And when we understand that we've been pruned, it doesn't mean that it's a punishment. Right. It's actually love. It's actually, if you bear fruit, you get pruned. The pruning doesn't kill the plant. The pruning is the preparation for the new season, like you said, and for more fruit ultimately, so that it will grow, right? Not that it would just, you're not making it smaller, you're actually preparing it to get bigger.
From a parenting perspective, pruning would be like discipline versus punishment. Not pruning is neglecting the plant, and it will die. Yeah. The fruit will get smaller and more bitter, and like year after year. Around here, it's very common to see like grapevines in people's yards that obviously like their grandparent planted, and they don't know what to do with it. And so
all overgrown.
Right. It's a mess. And if you dig through the layers of vines, there's usually some little clusters of grapes. They don't taste good anymore. They're not getting sun. They're not getting air. It gets sick and it dies.
Yeah.
So it looks like an exciting amount of growth, and it's fruitless growth. And then eventually that kills the plant.
Yeah.
So if you look at it as more when you don't want to punish your child, you want to discipline them and teach them so that they can bear fruit. It's a loving thing to do, to direct them in the right way, which is what pruning does to a plant. It's disciplining the plant to grow in a healthy way that's the best for the plant and the best for you as the person who wants to eat the things on the plant, and for all the things around it that depend on the plant besides you. It's like discipline versus punishment, like pruning versus being wild and just let nature go with the flow. Like nature is aggressive and destructive sometimes.
Yeah.
Like God is a big fan of pruning because otherwise you're neglecting.
Yeah. Really good. I remember hearing Alan Hood one time talking about how we think God's going to take us from glory to glory, and it's kind of this like corporate mindset of always up and to the right, like it's always going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and better and better and better. And he was talking about how to get to the glory, like Jesus was glorified after he was crucified.
Right.
And so the Christian life, our glory to glory, is a series of deaths and resurrections.
Right.
And that's how he takes us from glory to glory. And so we can't expect everything to always be up and to the right. And if it is, it's probably what you just described, which is unhealthy growth. It's actually not true fruitfulness. That is just, unkempt,
Right.
unkempt growth. And that we have to go through those pruning seasons, and it's more like up and down,
Right.
death and resurrection, winter,
Right.
and then comes the spring.
Which is winter is essentially forced pruning.
Yeah.
Like that everything drops what it needs to drop, not things that need to be cultivated and pruned like fruit vines, but God gave us seasons, I believe, on purpose, because I don't think he accidentally did any of what we go through.
I think we might do a whole episode on seasons
Great.
at some point.
Great. But all the seasons serve a purpose. Winter is not a punishment. Winter is serving a purpose.
Yeah.
So we tend to use language like that, like I'm going through a winter, or I'm going through a desert, or and like God made all of those things.
Yeah.
Like be in what he made, and don't complain that it's not the one that you wish it was. Like that's, again, arrogance. We get very arrogant and are insistent that we need to argue with God that spring is better, and we know because we know, and he's wrong, and it's foolish.
Yes. So pruning seasons, God's pruning, it's good.
Yep.
It's a good thing. It's not always easy to go through
Right.
pruning seasons because it feels dead.
Yeah.
It looks dead.
It feels brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, it in physical pruning, when some of us went out and helped a friend of ours who has several grapevines prune his grapes back, he kept having to step in, because we wanted to learn how to prune the right way. He kept having to step in and tell us to go harder. We kept wanting to leave more on there and be gentle.
Yeah.
And he kept having to come over and just like hack off
it.
a big, and we were just like, oh, this poor grapevine, we're not gonna. And then, the next summer when it's putting all the grapes on that are going to ripen into the fall, it's almost time to go pick grapes again. We couldn't believe it. Like, he was right.
Yeah.
He was the gardener in the vineyard, and it looked brutal, and it looked like we had killed it, and we were sure that we had done it wrong and that we had killed his grapevines. And he knew what he was talking about, and it made this past year we didn't get to do that, and the grapes are smaller. Like, it's not out of control. It's 1 year,
Right.
so, but the grapes are smaller than they were the year that we pruned. And that's very quick evidence. You don't have to wait 5 years to see that.
Yeah.
It's very immediate.
So is it true that, like you said, if you prune at the right time, that part of what you're doing is you're sort of directing the plant to put its resources towards the right places so that it will bear fruit in on those branches rather
Right.
than on the
Right.
dead or damaged or whatever
Right.
areas.
Yeah. Not only dead or damaged, but like you don't want with any kind of plant, you don't want branches like crossing in the middle and leaves touching in the middle, because that blocks airflow. And especially where we live, where it's so humid, that's just like, hey, disease, come on in. So even like with our peach trees and mulberry trees, and even my roses, because roses are real susceptible to humidity issues. When I prune them, I have to prune when you're looking at the branch, there's little like leaves coming off, and I prune off the ones when I cut off the top and they turn into branches, because that sends the energy there. I need to make sure that I'm not sending the energy into leaves that are going to turn into branches that are going to cause disease. Like you have to prune
Right.
with the future growth in mind, where you want the growth to go.
Yeah.
So
Which, if we experience God's pruning, which we will, because He loves us
because He loves us.
and He's kind and cares for our life and our future, when things get cut off, we should know that it's because He's directing us. He's like pointing us in a certain direction, and that's great. I mean, sometimes we want to, this is what you're supposed to do, but sometimes it's just as helpful to know, no, this is not what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Like He cuts us off and says, this is a dead end, this is a closed door. So you go, oh, well, that's great, because that helps bring clarity, and it helps bring simplicity and focus, and I can just, let the fruit go this direction. And it's going to be more fruitful because you're not splitting your energy in all different directions. You're not trying to do what you did last season and do the new season at the same time, which is impossible.
He can also, as the gardener, can foresee, like I said, where branches are going to grow into each other, where you might not see that oncoming intersection of branches that would cause disease. Like the gardener can step back and see the whole plant, and we, as the plant, can't see that. So
it's awesome. Any other thoughts on pruning?
I like a bajillion to you. But we can.
Oh, we're good. We can take as long as we need.
Okay. No, I mean, not like a specific layout of ideas on pruning, just like, if people can, I mean, I know not everyone is going to like hear this episode and be like, I am going to go plant a vineyard so that I understand pruning. But essentially, if the takeaway from this conversation can be, you don't have to grow an orchard. I would suggest just growing a basil plant and prune that bad boy and watch what it turns into as you prune it. And talk to Jesus about what that means and how you are His little basil plant. But if like the main takeaway from this chunk of conversation could just be that pruning is a loving act of a Father that's not neglecting us. And that wishing away pruning and hiding from pruning is forcing God to neglect you. And He's just not going to neglect you. Like He's going to help you and prune you and keep you healthy. That's it's another one. It's one of those church lingo things where it's in our language and we use it often and we don't fully understand what it means. And so we use it as a negative thing. And that's not ever how He means it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Good. So Jesus is obviously encouraging us to abide in the vine, to stay connected to Him as the source of life, in relationship with Him. He uses the analogy of fruit, that if we stay connected to Him, allow Him to prune us, that we'll bear fruit. There's a little verse here that I still don't totally understand that Jesus throws in, but He says, verse 3, already you are clean because of the word I've spoken to you. And I think at least part of what this might mean is that our attempts to stay connected with Him isn't earning our righteousness.
Right.
We're not earning our salvation, that our righteousness is because of Him, not because of what we do. But I do think there's a difference between having righteousness and fruitfulness. That's what I wrote down when I was looking at these verses. It's like we don't earn our righteousness, but we do have a part to play in our fruitfulness of our lives. And so verse 4, abide in me and I in you. Lost my place. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. Thoughts on what it means to abide in Christ?
I don't feel like it's a super complicated
Relationship.
idea. Yeah. I mean, staying, like we talked about in the first one, the point of Eden and the point of going back to Eden was essentially the difference between Eden and earth right now is there's, not being separated from God in any way, and, having his presence in, around, under, above, everywhere, in all the things. That would be abiding, that would be abide-y.
Yeah.
And there's always a temptation. If a branch breaks off, we had this happen a lot because of the wind with our peach tree this year. And I have some sweet friends who really love peaches and really love our peach tree.
It would show up at our house, and we didn't know they were here, but they're out in our yard
just eating peaches.
Off
it's great. Which I love. That's why I put fruit trees in the front yard. But it is heartbreaking when a branch breaks off because it's a little baby branch, but it's got 8 peaches on it, and they're not quite ripe yet. And, they're learning. They're learning how to garden. And the instinct is I can stick this branch in a vase of water and keep it in the sun, and it'll finish ripening. I can still have these peaches. And no, it's disconnected from the tree now. They're done. They can't.
Right.
They still need, there's chemicals that are released from the roots of the plant to make the fruit ripen. It's not just the sun. So disconnecting from the plant before you started ripening, before the fruit started ripening, the fruit is lost. You can't fix that without the base, without the vine. So,
yes, which leads to the next verse, which is probably my favorite verse in this chapter, or at least this section. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Whoever abides, lost my place again.
Sorry.
Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Like that. I love Jesus's real dramatic, definitive statements. Apart from me, you can do nothing. It's like the branch broke off. It's done.
It's done.
There's no life. There's no fruitfulness. There's no growth. If we get disconnected from Jesus, our spiritual lives, our hearts begin to dry up, shrivel up, and die. And there's nothing else. And like you said, you can do whatever you want to those fruit. To those pieces of fruit or the leaves or whatever, but if you don't have roots, it's useless. And I think there's so much there about just how we tend to worry about what's on the surface, disconnected from a real life in God, a real connection to Him. So anyway.
In the event that someone that listens to your podcast is a gardening nerd or a plant nerd, they're going to say, excuse me, you can propagate branches that break off. That is true. You are still going to lose the fruit that was on it. To propagate,
grows, right?
Right. To propagate it. If I've had this happen, if a branch breaks off of something, I will always try. If it's something I care about, I will always try to root it, because why not? Then you have two. But you will lose the fruit. You can't. The fruit will fall off. If you start seeing fruit and go, okay, I got what I wanted, I'm out, you lose the fruit. But to propagate it, you basically have to strip it and get it in the soil with the right things, and basically hide it. You don't want it to be in the sun, because again, you don't want it to focus on any upper growth at all. You want it to look like a dead stick. You basically have to force dormancy. If you're in a season where you are disconnected, if you're the little twig on the tree with the peaches on it, if you get disconnected from the tree, in order to try to grow roots again, you have to go into a season of dormancy and lose all the fruit, all the growth, everything off the top.
Yeah.
and look like a dead stick for many months. It takes many months to root something like a fruit tree. So yes, technically, you could propagate a branch that has disconnected from the vine, but it's brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal, but it is an encouragement,
Right?
for people, because it's not like, oh well, I got disconnected from Jesus and that's it.
Right.
Like there is mercy and there's grace, and He's so patient with us, and there is a way to repent. Like that. So I would think that stripping and starting
We are not
over,
a tree, so we do have more grace than trees,
Sure.
like that.
Sure. And we can repent, which I would take as that starting over process, and come back to Him anytime. And we're going to talk in another episode about being grafted in that whole passage in Romans.
Doing seasons and grafting. I'm excited.
Where we're going to talk about, the branch gets broken off, it gets put back, and some of those kinds of things. So, but I love that. Just apart from me, you can do nothing. Like, and it's so simple. But in some ways, it's so, keep going back to like pride and our ego and self-righteousness and self-sustaining. It's like, at the same time, it's like, that's what we need.
Right.
And it's the simplicity of staying connected to Jesus, trusting Him, not trying to do it ourselves, trusting Him, staying connected with Him, not trying to do all the stuff with the fruit and the branches and the leaves, but like getting our roots right, and then trusting that He's going to bring the fruit out of that. Also,
when you do propagate a branch, if a branch breaks off and you go through the process and get it to grow roots and start all over again, the DNA is identical. It's still the same tree. So you can't take cuttings of a tree if it needs to cross-pollinate with another tree. You can't do that. I tried doing that with some cherry bushes that we have, and it has to be different DNA. It has to be a different plant in order to cross-pollinate to bear fruit. With some varieties of things, they have to cross-pollinate. And when you do get rooted again and it grows another tree, it's a tree that has the same genetic material, it's the same DNA as the first tree. Yeah. So just as you're still technically like a part of that tree, even though you broke off and rerooted.
That's cool.
So
we're actually about to run out of time here for this first half, but I think I've got 2 pages of notes on these verses.
Perfect.
And so we're barely scratching the surface. I feel like I want to talk about fruit and what fruit is, and what, like, we kind of use it as churchy lingo again, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm bearing fruit. Like, what?
The fruit of the Spirit.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
And there's actually loads of verses about that.
Yeah.
And I want to look at that. I want to talk about what fruit actually is, because we've had some fun discussion, fruit versus vegetable.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Vegetables don't exist.
But we're going to have to cut this off here. We're going to immediately start this conversation up again as part 2. So if you want to join us for part 2, all of our paid subscribers are able to access part 2s, our bonus episodes. So you can click the link in the description or the show notes and subscribe. It's just $5 a month or $50 a year. And you can get bonus episodes for the podcast. You get free access to my Enjoying Prayer video course that just released, as well as some bonus articles that go out on our Substack as well. So you can check that out. And
I didn't actually know that about your course. What a good deal.
Paid subscribers get my course for free. It's a great deal.
Yeah.
So
I didn't know that.
Yep. So join us. For part 2. It's going to be awesome. Don't forget, God's presence changes everything.